Our next speaker is Dr. Wayne Evans. Sorry, Dr. Wayne Higgins. Who is Wayne Evans? Oh, okay, yeah. My old friend, Wayne Evans. Uh, Wayne Higgins. My apology. Dr. Higgins is from NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency Administration. Sorry, no, I used to be at NOAA. 1978 to 1996, so 18 years. So we were colleagues before. But Dr. Higgins is the director of climate program office. I mean, I worked there for 18 years, never got to be director of anything. The highest rank I got was branch chief, okay? That's the smallest lowest official you can get to. Director of climate program in the world, the climate research is extremely important, and U.S. Many labs, including NOAA, are leading research lab on climate change. I mentioned earlier climate models. The U.S. Have been contributing extremely well in terms of climate modeling, and NOAA in particular. And I noticed Dr. Higgins also was head of acting director of NCEP, and also director for many years for Climate Prediction Center. Dr. Higgins also has been elected a fellow of American Meteorological Society, which is one of the highest honor as a meteorologist. And Dr. Higgins' specialty, actually, I'm glad I only saw now, he's an expert on climate extremes, including precipitation extremes. That was the topic of my talk. If I knew he was expert, I wouldn't talk so loud. But anyway, without wasting much time, here's Dr. Higgins.
Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. Just want you to know I'm not going to talk about precipitation extremes today. I thought you did a wonderful job, so I think it's been covered. I have to tell you, I am just so thrilled to be back here. I visited Taiwan in 2011. Spent most of my time at the Weather Bureau, and I was so pleased to see Dr. Monique this morning for the talk. I feel really honored. And so many old friends that I've run into this morning. So I really feel here. Just a little bit about me. And by the way, I'm a wanderer, so I'm not going to stand over here. I'm going to wander around a bit. So I hope that's okay. I spent 20 years in the National Weather Service, as was mentioned, at the Climate Prediction Center. And in fact, Dr. Sky Yang, who's here this morning, and I go back all the way to the beginning of that period. And so my background is really operational climate services. In summer I moved over to the research arm of NOAA, and so in fact now I'm responsible for all of the climate research that NOAA engages the community in. And so it's in that spirit that actually the talk that I'm going to give you this morning is about what is NOAA's role really in providing science and services to enhance adaptation, in particular climate adaptation writ large. So what I want to do is just remind you of the context. We had and then immediately want to turn to how is the U.S. actually moving to meet the increasing demand for climate information. And then we'll kind of winnow down a little bit into looking at, all right, then what is NOAA's role in that space? And given that this is a Pan-Pacific conference, I'll try to emphasize as much as I can contributions to the President's Climate Action Plan that are both, well, that are international as well as domestic, to give you sort of the sweep and to particularly draw a bead on areas where I think that we can work together. So as you see, as we move to the end of the talk, we'll then focus a bit on some key societal challenges where I think the needs are very great and the capabilities are reasonably good for early wins, and talk about how we can partner together. So you already saw a version of this slide from Don Woobles. Just a reminder that this is a set of indicators that show independently analyzed data over the past several decades, from satellites, weather stations, weather balloons. We have ship data, buoys, etc. And the upward yellow arrows indicate increasing trends over the periods that are shown, and the decreasing or downward arrows show a decreasing trends for those parameters over the past several decades. And so collectively, again, the message here is that these are all consistent with a warming climate. So why do we care? Again, we've already heard a lot about this in the previous talks. Clearly our lives, our livelihoods, and the ecosystems that support us are all affected by variations in climate. And this goes right across all sectors of society. And so I want to emphasize that careful preparations here are required to seize opportunities. We have to recognize that there are opportunities out there that need to be taken advantage of, as well as the downsides of climate change. And also the efforts to minimize risks and vulnerabilities require careful planning and preparation. A few reminders here. Climate variability and climate change are inextricably linked. For those of you that follow this kind of thing, there appears to be an emerging El Nino in the tropical Pacific. That's an important point in and of itself because, of course, it changes through the jet stream the weather patterns, particularly in the cold season. But importantly, in a warming environment, we may in fact be experiencing more El Nino events in the future. And so linkages between El Nino, which is a seasonal to interannual type phenomenon, and longer time scales such as decadal variability, the deep ocean greenhouse gases, it's very, very important to start. Equally important, though, is the point that weather to climate is a continuum. And I think this is a very important message to get across to the public. I think people understand weather. You get up every day, you decide what you're going to put on, you look outside, but when you start to see more and more extreme events, and say, oh, this is related to the fact that we have an El Nino or the fact that we have a warming environment. So whatever the type you're talking about, you have to recognize that it's connected to climate. And information that needs timely, it has to be useful. And it's sometimes whether you're talking about, real-time warnings or weather forecasts out to week one, or climate predictions out to the season, or climate projections that are multi-year. You need to properly capture the increasing uncertainties, or actually I prefer confidence, the levels of confidence in the forecasts, and recognize that as you start, say, a season out and begin to winnow in on a particular, say, event as you move towards shorter and shorter timescales, that you have this consistent messaging so that you really have a seamless suite of impact-based decision support services for preparedness, response, and recovery. So it really is important to have this continuum of weather and climate, weather to climate in mind as we talk about the different types of events ranging from extreme weather events out to climate. So now I want to turn to an overview of how the U.S., through President Obama's Climate Action Plan, is trying to provide climate information in response to this increasing demand. There are three major pillars of the President's Climate Action Plan that are essentially mitigation, adaptation, and international. And so what I'll do now is quickly go through some of the key initiatives that are contained within the plan. Then I will go in a little bit more depth on some specific contributions of NOAA and NOAA working with its partners to these initiatives. So the first one here is Pillar 1, which is the mitigation pillar, is emphasizing, of course, reducing carbon pollution, especially from power plants, accelerating clean energy leadership, improvements in transportation, cutting energy waste in homes, businesses, and factories, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and providing federal leadership for that. The second pillar in President Obama's Climate Action Plan emphasizes preparedness in the face of impacts of climate change. This, I might add, is the pillar where NOAA today is actually making its largest contributions, although we do contribute to all the pillars. We heard in depth from Don Wuebbles about the National Climate Assessment. Talk a little bit more about this as well. Supporting climate resilient investments. Our administrator at NOAA, Dr. Kathy Sullivan, is very in tune with the need to build both weather and climate resilience and to make communities more resilient. Rebuilding and learning from Superstorm to try and move forward with various tools and techniques, climate models, weather and climate models, to try and improve, for example, on predicting and projecting extremes such as tropical cyclones. There are efforts to create sustainable health infrastructure. And then there's a suite of tool building efforts, a couple of which we're actually leading in NOAA, one of which is to build a climate resilience toolkit that has a number of themes, and again, I'll talk about that. And then we're also leading a number of key activities such as the National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS, to provide preparedness for drought. And I'll talk a bit more about that. The third pillar is really in the international arena, as I mentioned, and here it's efforts to address global climate change broadly that, as you'll see, include multilateral engagement, combating climate pollutants, expanding clean energy use, and international negotiations, bilateral cooperation, reducing emissions from deforestation. This was actually a major conversation at the UNFCCC meeting in New York. Global free trade, and mobilizing climate finance is sort of the sweep of the international pillar. So let me say a few words about NOAA. For those of you that don't know about NOAA, we really provide, I think, end-to-end environmental information. We are very heavily involved, for example, in building aspects of the global observing system, from satellites as well as in situ, global network of profiling buoys in the ocean, and so on. And we use this in part to monitor climate longer timescales, so that's absolutely critical. To help and contributing to the ongoing and timely assessments of climate impacts that we've been talking about this morning, to develop state-of-the-art weather and climate models, and of course, to be able to use the observations to validate the quality and confidence of such forecasts that you can produce by these models. And then, of course, to really get to, I think, the bottom line, which is to provide that information to society and decision making across all sectors. I'll also summarize here the four top priorities of our Noah administrator, Dr. Sullivan. And as you can see, she is very, very in tune with the need for community resilience. There is a major effort underway to evolve the National Weather Service. I was very pleased with this because I do think there are a lot of advances in the research community that we have not necessarily leveraged in operation, actually make weather and climate forecasts better. Investment in observation infrastructure starts with the observer system, and I think that's an absolutely foundational focus. And then organizational excellence really to be for partnering, both internally and externally, and so of course that means we as well. So the idea here is we want to make sure that the information that we have can be put into the hands of all citizens that information. So just a little bit, there are five things. Four of them are service line-off, the National Weather Service, this is the Environmental Service with satellites, the Ocean Service, and the National Marine Fisheries Service. I'm in the Office of Atmospheric Research, running the climate program there, so we actually do the research to make advances in understanding that lead to improvements in the capabilities that are listed here at the bottom, which include the observing system, monitoring, understanding through research and modeling, the predictions and projections, the assessments, and then getting to informing decisions. And let's not forget communicating and providing, for example, improvements in science standards in K through 12, which is something that we do, and then also making sure that improved programs at the college level as well. So the point here is that the service line offices draw on these capabilities to actually provide the information to society for decision making. Let's remember that we work internationally because climate is global. So we have to work together, and of course climate change is a global issue. But let's not forget that when it comes to making decisions related to adaptation, they're local. For the most part. So I showed this slide just to emphasize a couple points. First of all, NOAA has invested heavily in regional networks. Don't know whether you can read this in the back, but there are a whole suite of them. And in fact, I've added here a few of the Pan-Pacific Island locations for various NOAA assets, just to make the point that we're increasingly trying to position ourselves both nationally and internationally to help with this quite literally local decision making that has to happen for adaptation. So as I mentioned now, what I'd like to do is drill in a little bit on some solutions in each of the three pillars to the President's Climate Action Plan. I wish I could talk in depth about some of the science behind these activities, but there isn't time. So when I skip over something that interests you, make sure you either ask a question or come and see me later, because I'd love to talk about the science a little more. But in the interest of time, we'll go on now to just another reminder. We've already had a whole talk from Don on the climate assessment. Climate assessments both from the NCA as well as the IPCC. I just wanted to emphasize again that the third National Climate Assessment was released this past year. NOAA is a key contributor, but this program is actually a contribution of the U.S. Global Change Research Program. I am honored actually to be the NOAA Department of Commerce representative to that program. And so I see this as a very important activity of President Obama's Climate Action Plan, but actually also going forward, we need to understand how to sustain this effort in order to, for example, do the continuous monitoring that is needed to understand exactly how indicators are changing around the globe. So you can get the information on the NCA at these sites. Another really positive development that's an extension of the third National Climate Assessment are these new digital guides that were actually produced by a group that included folks in my office. And what they do is actually connect educators to the findings in the National Climate Assessment online, and they can be used in the classroom. So it's a great way, I think, to get students involved, in K through 12, for example, and what are the key findings of the National Climate Assessment and why does it matter to them? This is a really exciting effort that's actually being led by my office again. It's the Climate Resilience Toolkit. This is a site that's designed to actually help people find and use tools, information, and expertise from across the US federal government. There are 8 themes that are actually being built in this Climate Resilience Toolkit. There are about 1.5 of them done. The one on coastal inundation is actually up now and available, and there's another theme on food security that's nearly completed. There are other themes include human health, water resources, and others. I understand that there will be a White House event later this month to actually roll this out formally, so you can look for that. I'm very proud of the National Integrated Drought Information System. This is actually an effort that's led by Dr. Roger Pulwarty, who's one of the senior scientists in my office. The National Integrated Drought Information System was reauthorized in our public law in 2014 for the next 5 years. So the beautiful point about that is it means that we have tremendous congressional support, or in other words, a base budget. And what NIDIS is providing is effective drought early warning. And in particular, NIDIS communicates drought forecasts and monitoring conditions. And I can tell you, when I was the director at the Climate Prediction Center, we had a very important role to play in NIDIS by providing the seasonal drought outlook, as well as working with partners to produce a weekly drought monitor for the nation for this program. So NIDIS, I think, is really an innovative and foundational program because NIDIS is an integrated, that's this I, in this case drought, information system. And so whereas NIDIS is focused on drought, what I want to emphasize here is that I think it paves the way on other types of integrated information systems that we should be building for other type of extremes, such as floods, such as tropical cyclones, and so on. One other aspect within the President's Climate Action Plan that's important is this drought resilience partnership. NIDIS you can think of as the implementation of this drought resilience partnership, which is really focusing on coordination and collaboration across all levels of government. I'd like to think that get to the place where this moves beyond coordination within the US to kind of global coordination in the drought arena. There is a climate data initiative, which we are coordinating with NASA to spur innovation and advance awareness of climate variability and change. It includes, at this point, a catalog of climate-related data sets. There have been with data users that emphasize basically how to solve mutual problems in the area of data innovation. And they're working quite hard now on seeking commitments from the private sector in a public-private partnership that would actually allow us to be more robust in getting this climate data out again to the users that need it. So again, that's a coming opportunity. Very quickly now, this is just an example of how we're supporting adaptation in the Pacific Islands. This has to be it's a very high-level summary of what are called focus area coordination teams, or FACTs, that are working hard to generate transformational information. By that, what we mean is taking the science and making sure that those that are actually using the information understand what it means, and that it's accessible to them. It also means grounding the ways that actually are iterative, meaning that we understand what the needs are for climate information, and then we provide that information and make sure that it's useful for decision making. And so these are a couple of tools here. This happens to be the NOAA Coral Reef Watch bleaching alert here. I had a very nice conversation with John Mara about how they're using this pretty broadly now to produce file format that go out to up to 3 months. So these are the kinds of information that we're looking to develop again as key contributions to the action plan. I also have the privilege of being the U.S. representative to the WMO Global Framework on Climate Services. The Global Framework on Climate Services is constructed of 5 key pillars, which again, you'll start to recognize here, are about drawing on the observations and monitoring, as well as the research, modeling, and prediction to develop climate information services and to provide an interface between this information and the user community. So it's all about capacity development. What's interesting is the priority areas that are being focused on in the are of great interest to NOAA, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Water resources, food security, ag, human health, and disaster risk reduction. So these are the priority areas that we're working to develop these 5 pillars. And so I've been to Geneva once already this year. As we speak, there is a meeting in Geneva that's focused on the Global Framework for Climate Services implementation around these 4 priority areas. And then later this fall, I'm going back to work with the management community, management committee for the Global Framework for Climate Services to make sure that the support is there to actually do that implementation. So I just want to emphasize that GFCS, I think, is a very, very important program at this point in our international coordination. So I mentioned a moment ago that NOAA is interested in similar priorities to the GFCS, and so to drive that point home, let me emphasize that we've been focused for a couple of years in the climate goal within NOAA on a key initiative where we think that we can draw on these capabilities that I mentioned to make progress in several areas where we know the needs are great. And they include sustainability of marine ecosystems. NOAA is a water agency. Coasts and climate resilience, coastal inundation and total water level are foci there, including winds, waves, tides, and surges on top of total water level. Climate impacts on water resources, so it's not just drought, it's not just nidus, but also the wet side, floods, and then weather and climate extremes, and by that I mean broadly. And when you look at our ability to detect extremes and our level of understanding, if you think of that space, then extreme events like heat really come to the fore as being very timely for producing early warning systems. And so that's one area I would emphasize we're beginning to provide some impetus and support for. So the idea here again is that we can draw on NOAA's capabilities and then we can go out to the broader user communities, do needs assessments, understand what their needs are, bring that in, develop requirements, and then I, for example, as the director of the Climate Program Office, can support the research, the climate research, to actually fill those gaps in understanding, improve the models, and provide the predictions and projections to fill the gaps and meet the needs. So I think it's really a very nice situation for the climate goal, and I'm just so thrilled that it maps nicely to the global framework, which has a very similar structure. So I've talked a little bit about NIDIS as being an integrated drought information system, and again, I really want to drive the point home that what needs to be done is you need to gather up the advances in understanding, monitoring, and prediction, gather up the research applications and assessments, work on the communication and outreach, and also engage communities in preparedness in an integrated way. I think to develop integrated information systems, not just for NIDIS, but for all of these societal challenges forward. And it's a way that we can, I think, work together. Partnerships, absolutely critical to the overall enterprise. As I mentioned before, climate adaptation is regional to local. So we have to understand regional priorities. again, in order to fill gaps, many of you, I'm sure, are or will be involved in research, and especially requirements-based research. Once we understand needs for information, and we can work together on national and international priorities. I mentioned the U.S. Global Climate, U.S. GCRP, the Global Change Research Program.
Monsoon desk. And so, in fact, it was in 2011 that I came to Taiwan the first time, met with Wang Lu, and we had a great conversation. And one of the outcomes of that was the establishment of a monsoon desk. And Taiwan has been a participant, and we couldn't be happy about that. So it's great. We also now have Pacific Desk, and its activities are very much aimed at Pan-Pacific issues. So the point about the international desk is I think they're a great way to coordinate in outreach and education. I also would be remiss, though, if I didn't mention the International Research Institute for Climate and Society. NOAA heard the call on the need for developing a way to work on climate variability and change. This really kind of spun up in a robust way after the 1997-98 El Nino. So let me tell you a little bit more about IRI. Again, I think NOAA heard the call that there is a need, and after this international forum on El Nino, actually stepped up by working to build capacity in climate prediction, especially, and of course that hits home for me because I spent 20 years at the Climate Prediction Center doing this kind of work. But the beauty of the IRI is that it works towards global implementation on applications such as food security and human health. Partnerships, again, are absolutely key to actually making progress in these areas. So let me just conclude at this point by saying that NOAA, I think, is an important provider of science and services to enhance adaptation action. We've been doing it for a while. I don't want to give the wrong impression. We have a long way to go. We need to partner with you. I think the U.S. is making some great strides through the President's Climate Action Plan. And if you followed the meeting in New York last week, there's a lot to come. The NOAA contributions to the PCAP are both national and international. I'd like to see more international. And again, in my role as the U.S. lead to the global framework, I would love to talk more with folks here about how we can connect on that frame. Here's just a short list of some of the topics that I covered. There are many others, but I think these are the ones where NOAA is making key progress for this group. And again, let me say it, if I haven't said it too many times already, the partnerships I think are essential. And this is how we will ensure that your goals and our goals are mutual goals, and that our priorities can be supported and advanced together. So that's the end of my talk, and I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peters. Now, back to our moderator. Dr. Hill.
Any questions? No, please.
And, for this meeting. This partnership. Like, more that in terms of the partnership, how much NOAA work, or what kind of level, public, or well, I would say right now the best framework is through these global efforts, like the Global Framework for Climate Services. I think that's where we can build the most robust long-term partnerships. But getting more specifically to the question, one area we are pursuing, I think, quite robustly actually is the public-private partnership agreement. Now, it's mainly been national. So, what are those points? The point is that there's an emerging private sector. And it's probably 10 to 20 years in the U.S. behind the private sector for weather. And so we're talking about the private sector providers working in hand with public sector providers and trying to understand the handoff of the, for example, the kind of information that NOAA routinely gets, like global observations and the predictions. And of course, where the private sector, comes in, is providing value add for specific users. All right, so that conversation is going on, but it's mainly been domestic, and I would love to see it expand. So I think that's an important component for us to pursue. But I don't want to leave it there because I think the other point is that there are public sector providers and private sector users. So in other words, there are many companies that are coming to the table that are global. And I've had a number of meetings where NOAA is together with big companies, BP, Walmart, Exxon, JP Morgan, Chase Bank, just to name a few. And inevitably what happens is you find out they all have blended managers. That was actually a surprise to me. And they all have unique goals. And so it's about identifying those goals, finding their mutual, and then making the connections. Now, one of the things that I've been finding is that in many cases, companies think they need projections. For example, thinking of one meeting in particular, where in the upper Midwest of the U.S., there were several companies that were interested in soil information for several decades. And of course, I think we all know that information is not available. And so the important point is having the expertise at the table, so when the companies come along and say, we'd like this information, you can say, no, it's beyond the state of the art. I've had similar experiences with other pilots in the Northeast and the Southwest of extreme precipitation. So, but the partnering, public sector providers, private sector providers, there's that space. The key thing